Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Missile Industries' Ford Found Fairmont Hardtop project. Now, after a number of days of grim contemplation about what to do with that underwhelming 302, I've decided to start getting into this engine bay, because the engine bay is pretty cruddy and it does need a clean, irrespective of the direction I go with that motor. I can't put it back in the car until the engine bay is suitably prepared. Now, the plan is to thoroughly scrub this engine bay clean, maybe put some paint stripper on that section over there where the brake booster has done all the damage to the paint, and repaint it in yellow glow. I've got 2 rattle cans of Autobahn pre-mixed paint and a can of clear coat to go over it all, pretty much exactly the same way I did it with the wagon. Well, if memory serves me correctly, with the wagon I threw down masking tape everywhere and then just bombed the engine bay to a passable standard. But this time around I might actually remove a whole bunch of stuff, mask a whole bunch of stuff up, and then go holus bolus with the yellow glow, because what I don't want is to have sections of the engine bay not painted, and what I don't want is to have sections painted that I don't want painted. So the brake lines are already yellow, so they can stay yellow, but things like the strut tops, I could probably paint those yellow, couldn't I? Or I could just leave them black. Doesn't really bother me either way, but they have to come out. Strut tops, battery tray, engine mounts. That gearbox has got to come out at some point, but not tonight. Wiring harness, I should probably remove the wiring harness, to be honest, because I don't want to paint on it, because I hate that. I hate seeing wiring harnesses with overspray on them. So I think initially I'm just going to get in there with a bucket of warm soapy water right down here and just scrub off all of the 31 years of tractor shed dust that this car has all over it, and go from there. It's the middle of the week, so I anticipate doing a little bit of work here, a little bit of work there, hopefully painting on the weekend, and then I'll have some kind of result to wrap up into a video, hopefully this weekend or the next weekend. We'll see how I go. Alright, so let's have at it. So I've just pulled the heater box out of the car and it has revealed even more mud wasp nests. And that heater box has got some custom paintwork on it. Look at that, red. Who would have thunk? Okay, for the purposes of tonight's proceedings, here is the before shot. I've stripped away some stuff, but there is much more to strip away, and it's already 8:30 in the evening. So the plan is just to wash this engine bay down from top to bottom, making sure to get rid of all these layers and layers of dirt and crust everywhere around this engine bay. Look how battered that bloody crossmember is. These cars got paddock bashed when they were at the bottom of their market value. I think every single Falcon I own has evidence of the floor being bashed in somewhere along the line. But anyway, time to get stuck into the cleaning before my bucket of water goes cold. I think that's going to do for the night. I still have a lot of work ahead of me. I need to get those engine mounts out. I'm going to pull those brake lines out too, because one's yellow and one's not yellow, so they're coming out. I've pulled the wiring harness through the firewall, taken the throttle cable out. Once I get those engine mount bolts out, I will remove those power steering lines. And when the transmission comes out, the lines for the cooler will go with it. Although that's not going to happen until after the engine bay is painted. Don't ask me why. Mainly because I've got nowhere to put the gearbox. So yeah, yet more cleaning to do yet. I should probably mention that I put a seat and steering wheel into this car because it's going to need a seat sooner or later, and that steering wheel came out of the sedan because I'm not really a fan of wood grain steering wheels. But it'll do for the time being while this car's doing nothing in the garage. I have discovered that the seat's not really close enough to the gear shifter, but that is where it's going to stay because I'm about to show you how difficult the car is to get in and out of with this seat here, which is bolted down at the front but just sitting on mounts at the back. Here we go. Vroom, vroom. I can kind of live with it, as long as I'm not getting it out of the car. Alright, now it's time to get out of the car. Imagine how much worse that would be with the car on the ground. So that seat is not a long-term solution, but it'll do to indulge me while the car is on its way to being put back together again. I didn't want to sit on a milk crate because I don't have one. So I had this seat available and left over from a project I had a long time ago, and it will do for now. So I attempted to go buy some paint stripper this afternoon and there was none available at the local Supercheap Autos, so what I'm going to try and do now is just use a paint scraper and the remainder of a tin that I used on the bonnet of the wagon and just see if I can get that paint to come off, because it's in bad shape and it's really going to need some assistance. So I'm going to scrape off what I can using physical force, and then I'll use the last of the chemical to try and nudge the rest of it over the line. So I will scrape and then I will apply chemical, assuming I can get it out of the tin, because where is me last vestiges of paint stripper. Still sounds usable. So mechanical scraping and then paint stripper time. In hindsight, I probably should have removed all of these brake pipes and power steering lines first, but in the interest of expedience, I just hooked in with the remaining paint stripper that I had, and ta-da! Trying to decide if I should blast that with rust inhibitor tonight. I might take the heat gun to that and dry it out a bit, and then blast it with rust inhibitor. I think that's going to do for the night. I'll let that turn purple, and hopefully tomorrow I'll get the rest of this stuff out and do some more prep work. Alright, what are we up to? Day 3. The mud is slowly being transferred from the engine bay of the car to the floor of my garage. One bucket of water at a time, and the rust converter has done its thing. All that shiny metal is now turned into rust converter black. So tonight I'm going to rip out the engine mounts and maybe the power steering lines as well, because we don't need any of that in the way. Might even mask off the VIN plates. Don't need paint on those. Maybe I'll tackle the brake lines, maybe not, but I'll do something, because the more I do now, the more time I'll have to do other stuff on this long weekend. So let's have at it. And just like that, the engine mounts are out, the power steering lines are out, brake lines are out for the left, right and rear brake lines, and that will do for tonight. All that stuff is sitting over there in my rapidly cluttering up garage, so I will pick this up in the morning. I masked off my VIN plates like I said I was going to, so all those goals have been kicked for tonight. Now it's time to go to bed. Day 4, and I spent the entire morning scraping dirt out of my plenum, because the plenum was full of tractor shed dust, this thick. So I got in there with the vacuum cleaner and the compressed air and got as much of it out as I could. Then I had to wipe it down and faff about with it all. So now it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I have stripped the steering column out of the car and got that file all ready to do some prep to it. So my immediate plan now is to get the orbital sander out and just go over these pieces of chipped and divoted paint here and there and everywhere, and just give them a quick going over with the sander to take off the high spots, and then I will scuff up the rest of this engine bay, apply primer where appropriate, and then go and enjoy a coffee, and then come back, possibly apply some more primer, possibly apply some top coat, but I'm not ruling out doing top coat tomorrow after I dash primer everywhere in this engine bay, just on the off chance that it needs it. And it is pretty yellow as it is, so there's a good chance I should just be able to lightly primer where I need to, and then just yellow everything else again. Okay, I've done about as much orbital sanding as I'm prepared to do. Now I'm going to go and wet sand every shiny surface I can find in this engine bay in preparation for primer. Alright, I think that's going to be enough sanding for the time being. It's time to clean it all up and then bomb some primer over it. Before I get carried away clumsily bombing some primer onto this engine bay, I'm going to go over it with a tack cloth which I've freshly stolen from the house, no one will miss, to make sure that the paint sticks. So I'll get cracking into that now. That seam along that front cowl there looks like garbage. I'm very tempted to pick it off and have a look underneath it, but I don't want to see what horrors lay underneath there, and I'm not that sure I'm confident enough to pull that whole cowl section off and then redo it all. It's like someone's loosely splodged it back together again after they've pulled it up, messed around with it, put it back on again. And this seam along here, it looks far, far from factory. It's kind of disappointing because your eye's drawn to it. I know when I look into an engine bay of an XB Falcon, I always look at the cowl there and see if I can see evidence that it's been fixed up. And obviously this one's been subjected to some shenanigans. And now that I've taken the paint off it and ground away some of the bog, it does look pretty horrendous. I really don't want to do anything about it right now. I think a YouTube guy called David Freiberger summed it up the best when he said, don't get it perfect, just get it running. That's kind of where I'm at, because I just want to get the car on the road and driving around. And then in the years and decades to come, I can fix all the bits and pieces that I avoided doing the first time round, because I don't want this to be a 10-year rotisserie odyssey. I just want this to be wrapped up reasonably fast, then I can concentrate on doing a more thorough job in subsequent iterations of this car. But for now, the primer is on. One can of primer didn't go very far, but I have 2 cans of yellow blaze to go on tomorrow. Hopefully it brings the engine bay up. Still a lot of dirt in there, but all the parts that still have dirt on, I plan to paint black, and they're already yellow anyway, so it should be fine. Okay, it's day 5, and the plan today, this morning, is to paint that yellow and disregard any of my previous concerns, because so far this painting project owes me about $100, and I'll happily throw that all down the toilet later on to redo that cowl again, if it comes to that. And on that note, everything below this line is great. So I can put booster in, I can put the brake master cylinder in, the clutch master cylinder, all these firewall related things can go back in. And I can address the cowl sometime in the future. For the time being, time to throw paint down. Actually, time to sand it and then throw paint down. Okay, time to go over the engine bay with the tack cloth again. Going to pay special attention to the strut towers and the cowl and the firewall, because those are the bits that you can see when you look in the engine bay. The strut towers and the cowl get your immediate attention, because everything else is covered in engine and engine related stuff. So I want to make sure that I get maximum gloss and paint adherence to the bits that are the most obvious. When I did the wagon, this section here still had wires and cables and stuff hanging out of it. It never got painted. And occasionally when I look in the engine bay, I look at that and I go, I wish I did a better job of that. But the whole time I was building that wagon, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop and for it to be an unviable basket case, so I half-assed a fair amount of it, because I didn't really know whether it was going to be a going concern pretty much right up until the last minute. That's my excuse anyway, I'm just going to go with it. Alright, these have been out in the sun for half an hour. Hopefully that helps. Time to get painting. I may have misstepped when I used grey primer underneath that. It's taken a lot more effort to get the colour to come up. And I could probably do another can, to be honest. So here we are at the end of episode 11 of Missile Industries XB Found Fairmont Hardtop, and after my $100 worth of paint, that looks like arse. And I've made a couple of mistakes here. The first mistake was using a dark primer underneath that very pale paint, and the second mistake I made was assuming that this here was yellow glaze. It doesn't appear to be yellow glaze, it appears to be something else. Which means I should contemplate painting the entire car an entirely different colour, because whatever yellow that is, forklift yellow or whatever, probably isn't going to be the yellow of choice now, because this yellow glaze looks kind of like a yellowy green. That might be the primer behind it doing that, but the takeaway here right now is I don't want to continue to buy more rattle cans of yellow glaze and hope for the best. What I do want to do is get a 4 litre tin of primer of a suitable shade to paint a pale top coat onto, and then maybe I'll buy a pale top coat, 4 litres of that, of the colour of my choice, and then just go full send on that colour in the engine bay with a spray gun, like a grown-up, and do this all over again. Possibly next weekend, possibly the weekend after, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to get down to the paint shop, which possibly won't happen until next weekend. So that's annoying, but that's where we're at. I have looked at the result of my 5 days worth of labour, and I'm not satisfied with it. I mean, my standards are pretty low, but you can still see an awful lot of grey behind that yellow. And I could pile an engine into it, put all the bits and bobs in, but at the end of the day, it will annoy me no end if the job wasn't somewhat close to satisfactory. So, on that low note, I'm going to wrap this up.